Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the CACCI webinar on the Comprehensive Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. As the president of the Singapore Manufacturing Federation, or SMF in short, I'm honored to be invited to moderate this webinar. The webinar is going to be participated by 4 distinguished speakers, which I'm going to give introduction to you one by one later on, and also a diverse audience represented by various countries and industries. Being a new member of CACCI, please allow me to give an introduction of the SMF. Established in 1932, it is one of Singapore's oldest trade associations. Today, it comprises of more than 5,000 members companies, including multinationals, large local companies, and the SMEs. It spans across 10 manufacturing sectors. Being the de facto trade association for Singapore, our mission is to advocate development of the sector, and our focus centered around 4 main pillars. They are sustainability, human capital, internationalization, and productivity. Some of the main functions of the SMF including issuing of Singapore's country of origin certification, the national barcode, Singapore Standard Development Organization, and the SME centers that serve around 17,000 SMEs. We have an elaborate center for corporate learning for the manufacturing sectors and other activities such as mission trips to different countries, industry workshops, exhibitions, and so on. Now, coming back to today, the CPTPP promotes economic integration among members' countries. With 11 diverse economies involved, it reduces trade barriers, grants, improve market access, establish common rules and standards, and safeguards investor protection. By fostering regional integration and offering expansion potential, the agreement aims to unlock opportunities, enhance market access, drive sustainable economic growth in Asia-Pacific region. Now, with this fantastic FTA in place, we want more insight. How do we get access to this? How do we participate? And what are the opportunities that are beneath the surface of the FTAs? I'll leave the insights of this important free trade agreement to our distinguished speakers later on. Our first speaker, Dr. Roy Lee, is currently the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and have done extensive work in the CPTPP. He has a PhD from ANU. Dr. Lee, may I pass the time to you right now?
Thank you, Mr. Dan, from the Singapore Manufacturing Federation for chairing this session and also giving me the floor. On behalf of Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it is a great pleasure and honor to be able to join this webinar, co-organized by CACCI as well as the Japanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to discuss the very important issue of CPTPP. As Mr. Tan just introduced through his introduction, before I joined the Foreign Ministry in Taiwan, I worked as a research fellow in one of the economic research think tank in Taiwan, and CPTPP and other regional integration initiative are at the center of my formal previous research work. So the pleasure is just double the pleasure to be able to join the discussion today. Given the fact that we have already 3 very distinguished panelists that will be sharing with you their views on the future of CPTPP, and in particular, Dr. Yan, my colleague from the WTO and RTS Center, will be sharing with you why it is an important matter for Taiwan to join the CPTPP. I would rather to share with you some of the initial observations as a kind of opening remarks to underpin further discussions that will be following up on the remaining of this webinar. But before that, I would like to congratulate CACCI and the SMF, as well as the Japanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to co-organize this event. We understand that the Asia-Pacific region is one of the most important economic hotspots in the world. The combined GDP of all the countries in this region accounts for almost 2/3 of the global GDP. And also, in the last decade, the Asia-Pacific region, or more popularly, the Indo-Pacific region, is not only the global hotspot for geopolitical discussions, but also it is the home of the global supply chain. So since in the last 50 years, CACCI, SMF, and other friends, including the Japanese Chamber of Commerce Industry, have played an instrumental role in providing platforms, combining policymakers and also the industry to create a better environment and connectivity between policy and the business community. And for that, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate all these associations for your role, the role that you have played. We all understand that the world economic order has been dynamically changing. So my view is that the role of CACCI, SMF, and the Japanese Chamber of Commerce will become increasingly important because there will be a requirement and demand for more intensive dialogue between the government and the private sector in addressing the situations that are still unfolding. So I would like to encourage all the friends and colleagues from the business community to support the work of CACCI, SMF, and the Japanese Chamber of Commerce Industry for the foreseeable future to come. I'm confident that your participation and all the efforts with all these associations will create mutual benefits for everybody, including small and medium enterprises. So the second part of issues that I want to share with you is, of course, the importance of CPTPP, which will be discussed in more depth later. But let me start by sharing this. To the issue of CPTPP, or the discussion surrounding CPTPP, comes with at least two major dimensions. The first dimension is the value of the CPTPP as a major platform or pillar for the regional integration, economic integration in the Asia-Pacific region. It is important for us to forge a stronger consensus in light of the rapidly changing global economic order. 10 years ago, most countries, including Taiwan, are very much focused on economic efficiency, on cost reduction, on maximizing commercial gains. 10 years later, most countries in the Asia-Pacific region and beyond put more weight and focus on economic resiliency, on economic security and autonomy. So we are looking at a very different policy environment. And the value and the benefits of CPTPP amid this new and dynamically unfolding global economic order becomes a very important topic for us to have a better understanding of. The second dimension is the expansion strategy of the CPTPP, in particular, when both Taiwan and China have applied for membership. So on the first dimension, we are all aware that major economies, especially the United States and European countries and Japan, Singapore, of course, and Taiwan, are now putting more emphasis on economic resilience. There seems to be some intrinsic tension between the traditional regional integration process, which focuses more on liberalization and market market opening. So how can we harmonize and collaborate between trade liberalization and market opening with the new policy concerns of economic security and resilience? That's, to me, a very important topic for all of us to think through. And the value of inputs from especially the business community, I would say, is growing because of this new dynamically changing structure, economic structure, and the supply chain structure. So how can we work together to ensure that CPTPP remains at the center stage and serve as the center pillar for the new economic order that is forming in the Asia-Pacific region and beyond? That's actually my first, rather than observation, my first questions that to three panelists that are going to share with us later today. For Taiwan's participation, my colleague Dr. Yan will be sharing with you some of the Taiwan's unique problems of regional integration exclusion. To me and to many of the people in Taiwan, CPTPP seems to be the best and most reasonable option available to respond to this problem. Taiwan's participation of the CPTPP creates additional benefits for all members, and current and potential, because we are one of the economies in this region that share many of the fundamental values and principles with CPTPP members, such as accountability, openness, transparency, economic freedom. And also we would like to take more responsibility in the international community. So I think Taiwan's participation will contribute positively, not only to CPTPP members, but also to create a more stable and prosperity of the economic development in the Asia-Pacific region. But at the same time, we can't be naive about the reality, especially the geopolitical reality. And at the center of the debates, of course, the implication of the so-called China factor. Many members is of the view that China is not ready for CPTPP membership. But at the same time, does this imply that the window of opportunity is also shut for Taiwan? That's actually a very big question mark here. So how can we work together to address and accommodate these issues so that CPTPP can continue to expand and also to play a central role in the regional integration process in Asia-Pacific region? To me, it's a crucial agenda that we seek valuable inputs and experiences, especially from the business community. And I guess that's actually one of the main objectives of today's webinar. So in closing, I take this opportunity once again to thank you for inviting me and the ministry to join for this meaningful discussion today. I would like to wish this webinar every success, and I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for your opening remarks. It's definitely very insightful, and we thank you for all the hot points that you highlighted on how we can further develop this FTA to make sure that more members can participate meaningfully. Our second speaker is Mr. Noriyuki Mita. Mr. Mita has also been involved in the original CPTPP, which is the TPP portion. So he has a lot of historical information on how we formed this FTA. Mr. Mita is currently the director of Basic Materials Business Group of the Mitsubishi Chemical Corporation. Without further ado, may we invite Mr. Mita.
My name is Noriyuki Mita. I'm working for the Mitsubishi Chemical Corporation, a Japanese chemical company. But I think I'm here not because of my current position, but my experience in the CPTP negotiation as government officer at Japanese government. So I originally from the Ministry of Economy, Trade, Industry, Japan, and I was involved in the many EPA. In Japan, we call the FTA as EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement, but I was involved in the many EPA, bilateral EPAs and bilateral regional EPAs with the ASEAN countries. And also I was involved in the US-Japan economic integration and also the APEC. And then I was involved in the very, very early stage of TPP. Especially with the United States, we discussed the United States engagement in the Asia-Pacific integration. And also we discussed the possibility of the expansion of the P4, original P4. And then in year 2012 to 13, I was involved in Japan's participation to the original TPP negotiation. However, I was not involved in the original TPP negotiation, but I worked for the Japanese headquarters of TPP for 4 years and experienced the full cycle of the CPTPP. So first the negotiation, just after the withdrawal of the United States, and we negotiated this CPTPP and finally led to the conclusion. I never forget the days in the Danang when we agreed in principle. And then after the signing and also entrance into force, we moved to the implementation phase. And actually, it is very important stage. So Japan led the such implementation through the TPP Commission and committees. Actually, myself chaired some committees such as the labor or the state-owned enterprises. And in year 2020 and 21, Japan was the chair of the TPP Commission. And there, we decided to launch the accession negotiation with the United Kingdom. Okay, so today, I like to talk 3 things. First, to present the overview of not only CPTP, but also TPP in the context of the changing global trade investment scheme. So I like to talk about the history. And second, I'd like to introduce the important features and merit of the CPTPP. And third, I'd like to share my observation on the challenges and the future of the CPTPP for the further discussion. I'm afraid that the Deputy Minister Lee already talked what I wanted to say. But anyway, can I begin with the introduction of history? So this is the current status of Japan's FTA. However, this represents the history of a global FTA. So here I can say Japan has had the 3 pillars for FTA strategy. So first is first is the East Asia. So we began with the many bilateral EPAs with ASEAN countries, and also we entered into the negotiation with the FEPA with ASEAN. Then we expanded our partners to the neighboring East Asia countries of the ASEAN. Then with the development of ASEAN +1 FTA, we entered the negotiation, the RCEP. So this is one pillar, the first biggest pillar, regional integration of the Asia. And then second pillar is the Asia Pacific. As you know, there's the United States, but also there are several Latin American countries which are very much experienced and advanced in the FTA. So Japan concluded several bilateral EPAs with Latin American countries, and it was inevitable that regional integration within the Asia Pacific was developed based on the APEC. And the third pillar is that Europe and also the Middle East and Africa. As you know that biggest pillar of the global regional integration was the United States, American continents, and Europe and East Asia. So we wanted to have the access to the some kind of integration with European and expanded European market and the region. So this is the third pillar. So this is only the illustration of Japanese EPA policy, but this also reflects the history of the regional integration. Here is the history of the regional integration. So I would like to talk decade by decade. So last century, in 1990s, it was, I would say, the era of WTO. Of course, there was a very big, seed for the future regional integration, which were EU and NAFTA. But mainly that at that time, the global trade investment regime was governed by the WTO. In Asia Pacific, we only had APEC, which is not the legally binding agreement. Rather, some kind of the voluntary gathering, but has its own value. And in Asia, East Asia, we didn't have the strong movement of the regional integration. Rather, Asian countries suffered from the current crisis. But in the first decade of this century, now that East Asia was the center of the regional integration. At this decade, this was the decade of the FTA's network. So in Asia, there were so many bilateral FTAs, and then ASEAN was expanded to the ASEAN plus 1, ASEAN plus 2, and ASEAN 6. So gradually, that the greater integration of East Asia developed, and this stimulated the United States, which lead to the proposal of the FTAP and also the TPP, and also development of the regional integration, smaller regional FTAs, and so-called spaghetti ball and noodle balls phenomena problem lead the desire of the private industry to have the bigger regional integration, so that there will be unified rules and procedures. So with such background, we see the development of so-called mega FTA negotiation in the early last decade. We see the big launch of the TPP, launch of the RCEP, Japan, China, Korea, and the launch of the Japan EU and US EU. So all of the mega FTAs were launched in the early 2010, last decade. However, we see some kind of setback, backlash in the middle of last decade. I would say protectionist or anti-globalism movement, represented by the Brexit or Trump administration. So with that, I would say such movement was somehow stuck. But late last decade, somehow Japan led the conclusion of those FTAs. So Japan led the negotiation of the CPTPP, successfully led to the conclusion. And then Japan concluded the Japan EU EPA. And those stimulate the Asian countries to conclude the RCEP. Unfortunately, between the United States and EU, we didn't have the FTA. We don't have any FTAs. But I would say with some new challenges, protectionism, global issues. However, that we successfully completed the mega FTAs. So I would say that era of the mega FTA already ended. Then what we should do in the next stage? Of course, we can go back to the WTO, or we can continue the movement of such mega FTAs. But at least we have to say there are so many new challenges. So we have to somehow rethink about the global trade and investment system with such historical background. Okay, so and I don't explain in detail, but so this illustrates the movement of the development FTA. In 2000, we see the development of many bilateral and smaller regional FTAs, which led to the complicated multi-area networks. spaghetti ball or noodle ball syndrome. And then, such different and complicated rules and procedures with such complicated different rules, private sector called for the simpler FTA with the convergence in structure, convergence rules procedure. Also, with the development of many FTAs, we see the convergence in structure substance of many FTAs, and the many countries are exposed and have the increased experience. So, which were the background for the mega FTA, and then we saw the setback and conclusion of the FTAs, which I explained. And then I would like to move on to the TPP and CPTPP. So here, that the TPP incorporate the TPP, except for the limited number, so-called suspended provision. Such means the TPP maintain the high standard of TPP. And one very unique feature I would like to emphasize that CPTPP was negotiated, concluded in the context of dealing with Trump administration. So all the countries, 11 members, wanted to maintain free and open trade investment regime, which was originally promoted by the United States. And so they want to continue the movement towards mega FTAs and regional integration, and then try to tackle the protectionism. But at the same time, when somehow calibrate with the absence of US. But I have to say that the 11 members have the very strong attachment, obsession to the high level maintenance of the high level standard of the TPP and CPTPP. And this history shows this very well. It took about 6 years to negotiate TPP, but for the CPTPP, it was only 1 year, which means that the 11 countries wanted to conclude this regardless of differences of the position of the 11 countries. And the substance of the FTTPP, so CPTPP. So CPTPP is, I would say, the comprehensive FTA with very high standard among like-minded countries. This is very important aspect. There are two views, I think, about FTA. One is the viewpoint of the regionalizing or foreign policy or geopolitical dimension. And the other is the viewpoint of the, creating the trade and investment system. So from the second viewpoint, coexistence of many FTAs in multiple layers among different countries didn't disrupt the establishment of such a mechanism. Rather, it helps the establishment convergence of systems. So in that sense, we think that the TPP is one of the, milestone of such movement. And this CPTPP responded to the widening scope of trade policy. Here, I don't explain in detail, but here we see the widening scope of the trade policy from trade and movement of many business resources or doing business investment, and then move to the policy and the regulation, domestic issues. In other words, cross-border issues to behind-the-border issues. And then CPTPP maintained the very, very high-level market taxes. If you see the rate of tariff elimination, it is almost 100%. And also, CPTPP, TPP introduced a new and high-level rules and disciplines, which affected the negotiations of other FTAs. So here I don't explain details, but there are so many new chapters such as SOE, labor, environment, regulatory, coherence, and anti-competition. Also, we saw the strength of the many disciplines in many chapters such as ethnic commerce, government procurement, like that. Okay, so here are the features of the CPTPP, maybe from the viewpoint of the governmental policy makers. And what is the merit of the CPTPP for the private sector? So one of the merit is, of course, the merit of the bigger regional FTA So, here we can, realize the free choice of the business for effective and efficient allocation and distribution of the supply chain, because this greater regional FTA provide the, convergence in the rules and procedures. Especially, I think that the convergence in the procedure is critical for the private sector. And the rules of origin, it also provides a good special rules to, help the regional distributed supply chain, such as accumulation or shipment standard. And then, as I said, application of unified rules and procedure, especially procedures, are critical to the private sector. Also, application of the same liberal commitment in several service or investment-related chapters gives us the level playing field business environment. And finally, I'd like to emphasize that to realize such merit, proper implementation and if enforcement are critical. So finally, I'd like to touch upon the challenge and future. So for the challenge, first, now the implementation, as I said, so we need to increase the utilization through the dissemination and facilitation. And then I like as government to improve the operation. And of course, for the rules, we need the efforts of monitoring the enforcement. And then also, maybe that the CPTPP can work as the leader of global rulemaking. So CPTPP member countries have experience in implementation of new high-level rules. So as I said, there are so many chapters introduced at the first time in the history in the CPTPP. So providing such experience to our trading partners is very important to disseminate and expand such new rules. And even that without the expansion of the CPTPP itself, we can, have the influence on the other regions through the negotiation or conversation of the CPTPP countries with the other countries. And then, of course, we can have the accession so that we can expand the CPTPP. And one important thing is, even the CPTPP has enabled Trans-Pacific, but it is not now the regional-oriented. I would say it doesn't, confine the membership to a certain region. It is global. That's why that we have accession negotiations with the United Kingdom. So these are I think things now we're moving. But for the future, we need to think about some kind of the improvement of the agreement itself. So we need to incorporate many emerging challenges like this. And then finally, these efforts will lead to the exploration of new international trade-based system in the changing world, especially, as Deputy Minister told, we have the political reality. But even with the political reality, we still have the necessity to promote the free and open trade and investment regime, even tackle those concerns. So these are the issues I would like to present you for your further discussion. Thank you.
Looking at the challenges, as well as some improvement suggestions that Mr. Mita has suggested. So it seems to us that it is still some work to do, and perhaps inviting more members to the FTA so that it can form a more complete so-called arrangement. Our next speaker, Dr. Huai-Shing. She is the Senior Deputy Executive Director of Taiwan WTO and the RTA Center. She has a PhD in law from University of Wisconsin in Madison. And today she's going to share with us how Taiwan and CPTPP can come together and bring benefits, and at the meantime, some challenges that for that to happen.
In today's presentation, I would like to share my views from three aspects: the benefits, challenges, and outlook for Taiwan's application in CPTPP. The first dimension I'd like to point out is Taiwan's unique problem of regional integration, regional economic exclusions. Without doubt, Taiwan is an exported country. That means it is critical to help refine our trading conditions, including preferential tariff and trade rules. But unfortunately, comparing with our main competitors in the region, Taiwan is lagging in regional integration process and access to preferential premiums. The table compares the FTA coverage percentage for Taiwan, Singapore, Korea, and Japan. FTA coverage means that trade value that are covered by FTA that the country has signed. It shows that comparing to Singapore, Korea, and Japan, Taiwan's trade covered by FTA preference is as little as 8.19%. But the other three trading partners have shared like 77% to 95% FTA coverage on their trade. This implies there is a constant urgency for Taiwan to look for regional economic integration opportunities. Against the background, a broad range of Taiwanese exports faces relatively high tariffs. As you can see from the left graph, most of our products that still need to pay tariffs in our export countries are products like textile and plastics, and processed food and paper metal products, various kind of products. And also some of such products may be subject to different level of tariff rate. You may see from the right graph, most of our export of steels and paper products, you can see that they still need to pay as high as above 10% tariff rate in the exporting market. That makes Taiwan's exports not in a level playing field while competing with Japan, Korea's products. And in the Asian Pacific area, CPTPP and RCEP may be the most important regional economic integration activities. Both CPTPP and RCEP are the main pillars underpinning the formation of the FTAAP, that namely free trade area of the Asia Pacific. This was explicitly stated in APEC members' FTAAP vision and documents. In particular, it is clearly stated that in the 2014 Beijing roadmap for APEC contribution to the realization of the FTAAP. And I just quote the exact the word that greater efforts should be made to concluding the possible pathway to the FTAAP, including the TPP and RCEP. In such case, I think, or we think, Taiwan are qualified to participate in both CPTPP and RCEP, as Taiwan is one of the APEC members. But in other way, as for RCEP, personally, I don't think there is any chance for Taiwan to join without any political compromises. Therefore, CPTPP is the only reasonable opportunity for Taiwan in this moment. And therefore, I will spend a little time addressing Taiwan's preparation and challenges for CPTPP. As TPP and followed by the CPTPP has been Taiwan's trade policy priority. Taiwan has done the unilateral review of the differences between the Taiwan's regulations and the CPTPP rules, and also the level of market access between Taiwan and the other CPTPP members. Taiwan has reviewed our trading regime through 3 dimensions, including regulatory instruments and the tariff in goods, and also liberalization in service and investment. On the issue of regulatory reform, I think most of Taiwan's regulation would comply with TPP, while some areas might have challenges like SPS or SOE. But I think we can figure it out when we kick off the negotiation with CPTPP members. And I think the main challenge for Taiwan may come from the area of reduction in tariffs. I would elaborate more in the next slide. As for the challenge for the tariff, Taiwan's average tariff rates for agriculture is are 15%, and for 4.33 for manufactured products. Among them, some items like pork, beef, auto, and auto parts all require like 15 to 30% import tax rates. It is certainly the challenge for Taiwan to reduce tariff in such sectors. But as for the regulatory review, we have amended some legislation according to the CPTPP rules, so as to demonstrate our ambition to join the CPTPP. Those amended legislations involved fishery, pharmaceutical, copyright, and trademarks, and etc. But I think all those just demonstrate how we have gone so far. I mean, for Taiwan, our preparation has gone so far, and to the level of our preparation. But I think the global economic order is rapidly changing today, as highlighted also by our minister, Deputy Minister Lee, and also our speakers from Japan. The situation is dynamic. The international environment has been changed, and the tension, particularly the tension between the G2, has been kept elevating. I think there are some key factors that should be considered for the new era. Mainly the approach to ensure leadership in key sectors, to ensure our economic autonomy, and also to have more coordination with close trading partners. Economical autonomy is the dimension that I think have greater impact for CPTPP integration. For example, if CPTPP members wants to reduce reliance or the risk with China, we need to think about the value and impact of China's CPTPP membership. In addition, CPTPP may be the approach to invite more friendshoring partners that would also help to diversify supply chain partners and increase supply chain resilience for all CPTPP members. Taiwan and China have made CPTPP applications in 2021. According to the CPTPP accession protocol, new applicants should have bilateral consultants with all existing CPTPP members so as to deal with the issues and concerns of individual CPTPP countries. This consultation process is aimed at getting the consensus of all members to agree the establishment of working party or working groups for new applicants. All new applicants, including cross-trade, are waiting for move to this key stage. But overall speaking, I think there are challenges for Taiwan's application in CPTPP. But for the optimistic side, I think considering the geopolitical tension and the risk strategy, and also the readiness of our trading system and regulations, I think Taiwan may have advantage to join CPTPP. But on the contrast, China factors remains to be the largest obstacle. China already opposes Taiwan's CPTPP application. And also with the WTO model. The WTO model of China first may also be a negative factor for Taiwan's accession application. And I will use this slide to conclude my presentation. The first view I like to highlight is that participating in CPTPP or other regional integration remains important to Taiwan because we can remove the trade and investment barrier that will also enhance the transparency and certainty in Taiwan regime, Taiwan domestic environment. And also it is getting more and more important to have more policy coordination between like-minded supply partners. But in the meanwhile, there are some new models deserve to further attention, such as Taiwan-US economic frameworks. Taiwan and US, the United States, have established two new frameworks for collaborations. EPPN, Economic Prosperity Partnership Network, EPPN, was initiated by the Trump administration and has been followed by the Biden administration. EPPN touch upon issues such as supply chain resilience, cybersecurity, economic coercion. And the other one, the other framework is TTIC. It's kicked off by the Biden administration government that addresses some concrete areas of bilateral collaborations, such as semiconductor, electric vehicle. Most importantly, Taiwan and the United States started negotiation on 21st Trade Initiative last year, and we already conclude the first stage of trade agreement in this early June. I think either the traditional regional and the trade negotiation, I mean, the trade initiative between Taiwan and US, we cover like 12 issues, and those issues are new generation golden rules. So I think either the traditional or regional economic integration or the new economic model are possible ways to pursue. That said, CPTPP remains to be Taiwan's #1 priority in addressing our regional economic integration exclusion problem. And we need the support from the business community to mitigate many of the challenges Taiwan faces. With this, I thank you.
My name is Andrew Stoeckel, and I am the honorary professor here at the ANU, at the Crawford School of Public Policy. And in terms of the, I want to just develop some of those points that are made by Dr. Yen there in terms of addressing the benefits and challenges of CPTPP. And the main points that I'll get to is that at the time it was negotiated, it was a natural response to this changing landscape of global trade policy. But the things are going to get harder from here on. And the fundamental reason is because of the geopolitical tensions that are emerging and still there, and a pivot in terms of the policy, trade policy change by the United States. So we've seen this open, predictable, multilateral trading system gradually come under threat for the last 20 years or so, but that is now getting worse. And so we've probably got to the point where the globalization that we've seen in goods and services has probably peaked. Now, while this has been going on for some time, the real dominant thing I want to sort of try and get at is that because of the United States change, and that they have sort of made this sort of big change towards a new industrial policy or a new Washington consensus, and I'll run through some of that in a minute. But for all of that, you need to keep in mind that some sort of 80 or 90% of the gains from trade come from your own actions, from actions at home. The purpose of having an economy in the first place is to consume, and the better and more you can consume on better terms, the better off you are. So exports are very good only because imports are also very good. So this is something there that we need to keep in mind. And with this changing landscape, then really the value of CPTPP is probably going to lie in three areas, and I'll get onto that in a minute. So the thing is, all these regional agreements, and we've seen RCEP, TPP, you know, we've got NAFTA and all these thousands of agreements. These trade agreements have exploded, particularly after 1990. And that's partly in response to a decline in multilateralism and the commitment to multilateralism. And that was most apparent in 1999 when we had the failed launch of another round of trade talks in Seattle. And that became known as the Battle of Seattle. Now, the trouble with these bilateral arrangements is that they have a little sting in them. While they can create trade, they can also divert trade, and unbeknowingly can also limit the gains that you can see. So hence, we've seen this greater move over time to more regional arrangements with more players being involved. And that is better than the bilateral arrangements. So CPTPP has been a good move in the sense of where we are. But whether it's a good thing or not partly depends on, do we view the world of where we are as the glass is half full of water, or is it half empty? And so if you look at the half full kind of thing, because of the parlous state of global trade, then it's certainly CPTPP is a glass half full kind of world. But in terms of where we should be, where the world should be going, then it's glass is half empty. It's really is a second best world. And you can see here that up until 2008 and the global financial crisis, the world was globalizing, trade was growing as a share of global GDP. But since then, it has stagnated and it is now declining. Now that's in terms of world exports of goods and services, as we measure. And someone might say, well, what about, why has this happened? Part of it is, next slide, thank you, is that protection has risen. If you look at the Global Trade Alert and the IMF database, etc., these are the number of trade restrictions on goods and services and investment that have been introduced. And you can see there in later years, this rising trend. So the situation is getting tougher, it's getting worse. And a lot of people will argue, next slide, thank you, that, oh, well, this is, the digital world is where all the globalization is occurring. But even then, if we look at the number of data regulations, and this is put out by the OECD, that is steadily rising as well. Now, the trouble is we don't really know or understand how the economic impact of these rising regulations. But we're now emerging into a world of three different models. First is the European model, where the data belongs to the individual. The second is the United States model, where the data belongs to the company that collects it to be used as they see fit for commercial gain. And the third model is the China model, where data belongs to the state for use of surveillance and censorship, etc., and control of the citizenry. So those three models are basically incompatible. And then along comes artificial intelligence, where this has the possibility of changing these digital arrangements radically. And you've seen now, Europeans have already started to pass legislation governing their artificial intelligence, and someone else will pass something else. So we'll get this sort of multipolarity going on in the world, and that will make trade, or even in digital space, potentially more difficult. Why are we seeing this world? It's a natural sort of reason why we've seen this decline that's been going on. And one is mission creep. It's a natural tendency to try and deal with all these different things of human rights or labour standards, environment, etc. And all of those are very good things to deal with. The trouble is you cannot kill two birds with one stone. And it was Jan Tinbergen, the Nobel Prize winner. He got a Nobel Prize, said, if you've got one instrument, you can only pursue one goal. And that's the trouble. So we're now seeing this pivot by the USA are now making this situation even worse. What's happened is a new consensus is emerging. So in April, we saw a speech by Janet Yellen, and she made this statement there that China's decision to pivot away from market reforms to a state-driven approach has undercut its neighbours and countries across the world. And that has come just when China's striking this more confrontational posture towards the United States allies and partners and so on. Now, just one statement like that, you'd think maybe not matter, but 9 days later, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, came out with a major economic statement at Brookings think tank. And he said partly lots of things, but the third step in this new strategy he was articulating was to move beyond these traditional trade deals to innovative economic partnership, focusing on the core challenges of the time. And what are some of those? And he highlighted what they were negotiating with 13 Indo-Pacific nations: clean energy, tax fairness, corruption, high standards of technology, resilient supply chains, and so on. And that's on top of all the existing labour standards and these other issues. And the trouble is, while all these issues may be very good things to pursue, the trouble is, what is the instrument that you have? And with trade policy, and trade is simply commerce across borders, right? It's simply the buying and selling of goods and services across borders. And the only thing a country can do is either allow or disallow that exchange to occur. And on what terms, and using varying different ways. You can use quotas or tariffs or regulations or outright bans or subsidies, etc. But they all amount to, do you allow that commercial exchange across the border? And so we need to then keep in mind, why does this matter then for CPTPP and how it might evolve? What we've got is, either way, the CPTPP members, either members or aspiring members, will continue to trade heavily with the United States, the China, and the EU. These are the three big economic blocs in the world. And so trade with those groups is going to be very important. So who joins CPTPP? Is it the USA? Remember, as Mr. Mita said, they were one of the original negotiated agreed members of TPP, which then evolved into CPTPP when President Trump said no more. So you've got the trade with the USA, etc. So the developments in those three blocks, particularly on digital aspects and on the technology, right, is going to drive those gains that you're going to see with CPTPP. And the issue is the main player here is probably the USA, in my view, because it has enormous wealth and power and strong alliances, and it's also got the history. After World War II, when America was the global hegemon, right, it set up the Bretton Woods Agreement, and those institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, the United Nations, all housed there in America. And so how that American industrial strategy moves and develops, particularly as enunciated by Jake Sullivan, will matter enormously. Now, we don't know how that's going to evolve. The amount of direct money over so many years is not that big, but there's been this fundamental shift away from laissez-faire free trade towards an interventionist industrial strategy. This industrialization, this new wave of industrial policies is largely driven by three things. One is climate change and the need to decarbonize and the amount of just goods and services that you need to do that. Second is this supply chain resilience. And then the third is this rising militarization that's occurring pretty much right around the world, partly in response to the Russia-Ukraine war, etc., the militarization that's occurring in Europe, but also China is militarizing, and we've got that China-Taiwan potential tension there as well. So the narrative then, in summary, let me just summarize really the story is how I see the world, is that we've seen this commitment to open multilateral trade and decline. That's been going on for some time. So then we've seen this resort to bilateral and then increasingly regional trade agreements. Regional trade agreements are better than bilateral because these agreements are both a symptom of the long-term decline in bilateralism, but they're also partly a cause. They help cement in the failure of the WTO to act as an effective mechanism for dealing with trade issues. So on top of this slow sort of burn, if you like, of the decline in the multilateral system, particularly since the global financial crisis in 2008, we've seen a whole lot of new geopolitical tensions emerge. China's challenge to the US global hegemony. We saw the trade war between the United States and China initiated there by President Trump. But notice that President Biden hasn't removed any of those tariffs. Then we've seen the Russia-Ukraine war and then the alignment between China and Russia. And in response to that war, there's weaponization of trade and finance. And so now you're going to see the BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. In August the 22nd, they're meeting, and they're going to try and push the idea of an alternative currency to the United States dollar, etc. So all these reactions are in response to this rising geopolitical tension that we've seen. Then, of course, another big one is this climate change and who pays. And that's leading into this climate border adjustment. So we've seen Europe start to ban products that come from deforestation, etc. We've seen them to try and introduce carbon border adjustments. But it's the problem we've got in all of that is you've still got this article, I think it was Article 3 or something 5 of the United Nations Original Framework Agreement, agreed at the United Nations by all the countries in the world, said do not use actions to address climate change for trade restrictions. So there's potential tension coming there. And the final one there is the pandemic and supply chain security. So despite all that challenging outlook, you say, well, that's pretty difficult. The point is trade, that is commerce across borders, trade has something very powerful going for it. It is win-win. Both the buyer and the seller gain. Otherwise, that commercial exchange would not occur. So if there's a gain to be had between businesses, and there's business and commerce, chambers of commerce and all your members, they're the ones doing all this, right? They then will tend to promote and push for more trade. So 3 things I think CPTPP could do in this challenging, changing world is go out and keep measuring through transparency where the gains are, where are the barriers to commerce, right? Now, just how that ought to happen, there's a special way that to really be effective was outlined in the CACCI policy statement that was put out a couple of years ago. But always keep in mind, to keep all this in context, is that if you really want to do well in this world, most of the gains to trade come from getting your own house in order. The second thing that can happen is because geopolitical tensions have largely led to this, renewed sort of world of trade intervention and the weaponization of trade, is probably there's a group there in America, the commercial interests in the United States would have the greatest incentive to try and get some common sense around the world. And the third area that needs work is to put far more resources behind the under-researched issues of the digital economy, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and I throw in there intellectual property as well, because they're related to the digital economy, who owns the new information that we're generating. So these are the key things that we need to then concentrate on. And I think, that's where CPTPP can do the best. The point about CPTPP is it has the kernel of a good agreement based on sound WTO principles when it was first negotiated. And so that's something there, I think, to build on that could happen. There are the 2 studies, the CACCI statement, the policy statement by CACCI, and the work there that I did that led to behind that. And so thank you very much for your time and interest.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stoeckel, for the very insightful aspects of CPTPP and your insight into how the US pivot will make a big difference in how this span out, and also some of the challenges that we will face along the way. Can I direct the first question? This question is from Mr. Anand Karan. His question is, what is the criteria to join CPTPP for Asian countries? I suppose, may I direct this question to Mr. Mita, since you have possibly the biggest, the longest history in this FTA negotiation. Thank you.
So so I would say if this is say the original members, 11 members, mainly that its willingness in the last decade to join the global movement to the bigger regional integration and to capture the opportunities. So I think that's the reason why the Malaysia or Vietnam joined the TPP. So, and I would say one of the reasons was, the access to the United States market. But even with the withdrawal, after the withdrawal of the United States, those countries kept to be in CPTPP because they knew the merits to maintain such open, free, and high-level trading system. So I think still that for them to want to be joined the CPTPP, one thing that they are willing to do that. And of course, there are many difficulties. For example, for the Vietnam, Malaysia, they have to deal with a very big political issues like that, government procurement issue for Malaysia, or the other labor-related issues for the Vietnam. But they wanted to be the part of the global economy and willing to make the domestic reform with that. So if the other members of Asian countries have some kind of will, maybe CPTPP is one of the possibility, and maybe criteria is that how they see the merit of the CPTPP and their reality to meet the high level.
Thank you, Mr. Mita. Not sure if Dr. Andrew, Professor Andrew would like to add on to this. I mean, what are some of the would-be members country can potentially look at how to join, and what are the internal so-called things that they need to do that? Professor.
Well, thank you. I mean, two things. One is at a very conceptual level, right? Think about this. So, for example, the United Kingdom, let me talk about something else different. The United Kingdom, right, have voted for Brexit, and they left the European Union. They left that agreement. Now, the United Kingdom could join 80–90% of the gains from the European Union simply tomorrow by adopting all of the policies of the European Union, all of the standards and everything else freely, unilaterally on their own, without being a formal member. So what you do and who you are a member of partly depends on your own actions. So any country, so Taiwan or whatever, anyone can, in a sense, join that regional grouping, at least informally, by simply adopting all the standards, the barriers, the informal, etc., and all those other arrangements that the other members have. Now, what happens, of course, is that there's all these domestic political issues, and so it depends on how far and fast a country can go on its own. And Dr. Yen mentioned some of those difficulties. She mentioned agriculture as one, and that's got a lot of history on it, on its own, etc., for reasons and political reasons we all know. So in all of these agreements, the realistic issue, not as opposed to the theoretical thing I just outlined, The realistic issue is how much compromise do you need to make? How much sovereignty do you need to give up, right, in exchange for the commitments by the other members of that group? And then what are the benefits of that? So I know that's a more theoretical sort of answer, but it seems a natural one. The key thing I really want to get at, though, is whether America is ever going to want to rejoin that CPTPP, right? And whether or not they're going to go down that route or whether they don't. That will be a key one, because America is so big and powerful in the world with some very strong allies, right, that are tied to America, including Australia, Canada, Japan, and so on.
Thank you, Professor Andrew. I just would like you to hold on just one more minute, because this other question that came from, unfortunately, it's an anonymous person that came in. And his or her question is, do you think, Professor Andrew, that the US will join back the CPTPP and revert back to the TPP arrangement anytime soon? So that's the question. Just a quick comment, please. Thank you.
Right. Frankly, I don't know. It'd be pure guesswork. They should, because they were an original party to the agreement and they helped set the terms of TPP, right? It should be an easy step for them to rejoin and join that grouping, right? So I would have thought it was likely. However, predicting American political trade policy development is a tough one, because they've made such a major move towards interventionism, worrying about the middle class. They've done away with trickle-down economics as enunciated by President Biden. So it's a big issue. I would have thought yes, but then I'm an economist, not a politician.
The next question goes out to Dr. Yan. Dr. Yan, the question is, what are the possible scenarios for Taiwan and China CPTPP applications? And while you're at that question, what are really the implications of the geopolitical tension to this arrangement? Thank you. Dr. Yan, please.
Okay. Before I answer this question, I think I want to make a quick comment about the U.S. return to CPTPP. I think the Biden administration would not. It doesn't think that he has any intention to go back to CPTPP. At least in his first administration. If he will change, I'm not sure if he will change his administration, will change his mind, maybe in the next term, but it is not the time for US to come back to CPTPP, because they consider that those regional economic integration that lead to the job loss for the United States, and though the economic situation, the bad situation, or their job loss, all come from the endless liberalization in this regional economic integration. So I think that is a quick point about this question. And then about the possible scenario for Taiwan and China, I think there are three scenarios that may take place. The next challenge, as I mentioned in my presentation, is that we all face the establishment of working group. And I think there may be three scenarios for cross-trade CPTPP applications. The first one is that to set up the working groups according to the readiness of the new applicants. And in such case, I think Taiwan may have enjoy some advantage. And the second scenario is that probably the CPTPP members will set up large working groups covering all applicants. As far as I know, they are, in addition to cross-trade, there are also some country from Latin American. So I think probably like 5 or 6 applicants are waiting for have the working groups. So I think probably the second scenario is to set up a large working group covering all the new applicants, not limited to cross-trade. I think in such case, probably we can allow some space for those CPTPP members. They do not intend to take sides at this moment, because it is we have the working group, then it's up to the negotiation of each new applicants with CPTPP existing CPTPP members. And the third one is to make first come, first serve. That is proposed by China, of course. But in such case, I think China would be the first one that CPTPP members need to consider. But in such case, it may postpone all the coming applicants for the following negotiation process. So I think probably that's the scenario I can think of at the time.
Thank you, Dr. Yan, for your very insightful thoughts about the questions. Next question go out to Mr. Mita. I think we have many trade associations participating in today's webinar, and we're wondering what are the roles private sector or trade organizations, such trade associations such as us, right, can participate or can lobby in terms to develop new trade or investment system in the context of CPTPP. Mr. Mita, please.
Yes, I would say that the role of private sector is, very important. And actually, in the first decade of this century, when we developed the FTA networks, the voices of the private sector to call for the convergence and the rules and procedures was the main driver for the greater regional integration. At that time, exactly the international, some Asian Chamber of Commerce or such kind of private sector's coalition raise the voices to the respective government, also the national, institutions such as ASEAN or IPEX secretariat. That was a very, very good input for the government bureaucrats. Actually, from the viewpoint of the government bureaucrats, if there is a voice if we have something we want to do, we need some kind of support from private industry, private sectors. So in that sense, private sector has a very good role. So it's in general. Also, maybe the important thing is that the private sector really utilize the FTAs, maybe through the certificate origin trade, and also maybe say that if the rules are really implemented in certain countries, and if that's not the case, raise the voice. So such movement will clearly, give the pressure to the government to upgrade the FTAs. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mita. That's very insightful for us to see how we can help to formulate a better policy making for our government to do that. Thank you. The next question comes from our audience, and I would like to direct first the question to Professor Andrew Stoeckel, and perhaps any other speakers can join in as well. The question goes this way. Well, some of our participating member countries of CPTPP are developing countries. So do we think that CPTPP really benefit the SMEs of developing countries? Well, so I think that's the audience is checking whether this is relevant to SMEs of developing countries. Professor Andrew, please.
Yeah. Well, the work that I've done on preferences in developing countries and trade is unquestionably yes, that trade is beneficial, right? Now, but a lot of people, they look at exports only. They take the wrong view that exports are good, but imports are bad. The point is that imports and exports are good. There is no SME in the world that could survive without having the access to the best products and inputs and best value for money arrangements. So even that little cafe owner serving coffee, they need a barista machine, they need the crockery, etc. They may not be exporting themselves, but they need the access to the best value for money products as inputs so they can run a successful business. So again, it's not difficult, you know. Trade is simply commerce across borders. And the more commerce there is, if it's voluntary exchange, the better off both parties are. Otherwise, the commerce wouldn't happen. No one's going to make a deal or an exchange or sell a cup of coffee if they're going to be worse off. All commerce, right, leads to people being better off. So it's both exports and imports. And the reason why exports are so valuable is it provides the foreign exchange to be able to purchase the valuable imports. And that's what we've got to get at. So there's a bit of a thinking change that really should happen there. And just play on this most powerful thing of all, that trade is win-win. Both parties, the buyer and the seller, gain. And that's what we've got to keep in mind. And if one country has a competitive advantage over another, then the exchange rate handles that. The exchange rate will devalue and restore the competitiveness over the entire country. And that's what a flexible exchange rate does.
Thank you, Professor. That's a really insightful perspective of how, you know, imports is just as important as exports.
Yes.
I think that is a very, to me, a very fundamental change of how we look at trade, right?
Yes. You've got to look
so
at both sides.
Fantastic. Just, I'm not sure if the other speakers have any comment. Well, I mean, is this relevant to SMEs? Maybe to big corporation, maybe, but SMEs, does it really matter to us?
Can I have a comment?
Yes, please, Mr. Mita.
I'd like to draw your attention that there is a chapter special in the SMEs in TPP and CPTPP. The thought behind this chapter is that the hypothesis that the trade and free trade and investment high level rules will benefit the SMEs. However, in order to do that, we need to unlock the capacity or develop the capacity of those SMEs. So in this chapter, we will identify the problems for the small and medium enterprise receive the benefit of CPTPP and try to discuss this issue. So I think that already the concept was there. So important thing is how we really implement this chapter.
I have another question from Mr. Sopara. And his question is, I would like to ask a question, is the CPTPP friendly and welcoming to all countries? If yes, what will the requirements be different from one country to another? Maybe maybe you can, I'm not sure if Dr. Yen could give some perspective on whether it is open to other countries, and if so, any differing requirements in your opinion. Thank you.
Okay, about the question, I think CPTPP is open to any countries that they have interest to fulfill to meet the high standards of those rules covering CPTPP. But as far as I know, the CPTPP do not offer too much exceptions departing from those rules. So if countries that, if the new applicants, they want to join CPTPP with a lot of exceptions, or they want to claim they are developing countries and to enjoy some special and differential treatments, I think it is not FTA that you should join in. You should see other alternative.
Thank you, Dr. Yen. Mr. Mita, since you've been involved in this.
I have to say that all the existing members will stick to the high level standard because they already paid the price to meet the standards. So maybe the room for the exception is not so big.
Thank you. There's another question, speakers, and I do not really have this perspective of this. So I'm just going to read the question, Mr. Akram. Is FTA allowed, or I think the question should be worded, does CPTPP members, can CPTPP members trade any commodity without any CDD measures? I'm sorry, I don't know what CDD is. I'm sure you will know. So regarding to this question, can we give some perspective? Any of the speakers, please.
I'm not sure of the question.
Yeah, not sure.
Okay, sorry, gentlemen. So we can't. We don't know what CDD means. Yeah. So the next questions. The next question is this, right? What are the policy areas CPTPP can and should tackle and incorporate going forward? Can I direct this question to first Mr. Mita and then to Professor Andrew, please? Thank you.
Okay, I think already some of them are mentioned, but I think that first maybe the one area include the digital trade. Which includes both the liberalization aspect as well as dealing with the privacy or security issues, also the capital digital surveillance like that. So this is very big area, and actually that the members already talking about this. Because we only have the chapter of the electric commerce. Even that was a very important progress, but they are discussing the further steps. And also the environmental, labor, or other social issues. But also that I think that the issues related to the abuse of the trade measures under the name of some other reasons. Of course, there is the safety exception clauses. However, we need to tackle some of them to deal with the protectionism. And then also we have to talk about today's, issues, which process already told I don't mention.
Yes, well, I've already mentioned the areas that I see. When we talk about traditional areas like textiles or agriculture, the reason why these areas have protection or particular rules or whatever is a lot of history and culture and tradition and therefore domestic politics. And so these areas are difficult to change. I think the emphasis needs to go on to those areas which are new, like digital economy, cybersecurity, etc., where the standards are not clear, right? And some good thinking needs to go on. So by way of example, one of the great achievements in global trade has been the container, right? The standard container, and that's just lowered global transaction and shipping costs, etc. But it took about 20 years, in fact. The military were using one of their own standards well before that became the standard. So these things don't come in easily, but you can easily see a proliferation of standards from which it will be hard to unravel unless we do that thinking now, what is the best way forward in terms of what we can see in the digital economy, because it is growing apace. So that would be a priority area for me.
Now, we know in any FTAs, in CPTPP included, right, it relies on the members' country to play by the rules. And therefore, when even a WTO, when it's something that's so established, we constantly hear members complaining, some members not playing by the rules and things like that. How can CPTPP be different, so-called be governed in terms of the members country playing by the rules? Can we have the perspective from the speakers, please?
Right. Well, in those documents that I highlighted at the end of my talk, I go through this issue of rules. The point is, rules make us better off. All markets need rules. They need property rights, enforcement of contracts, standards, etc., to make them efficient. And the point is, in a world of sovereign nation states, right, countries set their own rules. Otherwise, you don't have sovereignty. If someone else is telling Singapore what to do or whatever, well, then you're not a sovereign nation state. So then the enforcement of the rules, right, international law can only be enforced voluntarily through compliance, right, out of your own self-interest. But how on earth can you act in your own national self-interest if you don't even measure it? And very few countries do that. You've got to measure the costs and benefits of what you agreed, what's in it for me. The minute you go to a third party, right, you've lost it, right? Because the third party can interpret things in different ways. So self-enforcement compliance is the best way of all, which, it comes back to do good domestic transparency. Countries will act in their own national self-interest, right, irrespective of what we see, because that's who vote these people, the leaders, in. Or if it's an autocracy, then allow them to survive. We've seen it in Russia, that even there's an autocracy, President Putin could be ousted at any day, and he nearly was maybe a few days ago. So, you've still got to, right, be compliant with your own population.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Mita, please.
Yes, I think the professor already told or answered the question, but my feeling is the same. That if the merit of the international commerce, or called by the private sector is bigger than some kind of the national objectives and sovereignty, countries are willing to abide by the rules. So maybe we need to find what is the real voices of the private sector doing the international commerce, then find the area. In that area, we can finally compromise some rules.
Thank you, Mr. Mita. Dr. Yen, do you have any comments about rules, following the rules, and who's governing who?
Okay. I think the problem among WTO members that it seems that so many countries, not so many, a couple of country members that do not follow WTO rules. That is, we have 164 members in WTO, but now we only have 11 members. But maybe there are more, 5 or 4 members coming. Then the way to keep all members abide by the rule is that you only invite the member or country that have intention or they have a willingness to commit to the CPTPP rules. So you should invite some countries that with like-minded and they respect the rule of law, and they also can follow the market economy. That's my brief comment.
Thank you very much, speakers. I think that's about all the Q&A questions that we have for today. But before I give the closing statement, can I invite you to each give a summarized statement of your presentation and your thought for the webinar before we go to the closing section? Since we have Dr. Yen, can we have your closing statement?
I think CPTPP and TPP has been Taiwan's trade priority, and I think Taiwan will do all the efforts, make all efforts to achieve the CPTPP requirements. And we hope that we have some help that you can, and I believe if Taiwan can join the CPTPP community, we can bring a world-class supply chain suppliers, and we also can provide some alternative sources of supply of to the increase economy resilience. So that's my summary.
Thank you, Dr. Yan. Mr. Mita, do you want to give us a closing statement?
Thank you very much. Actually, I hope that many people talk about the future of CPTPP. And when I was working on CPTPP in the last decade, I thought the CPTPP can be the third pole, United States, as transportation, the EU, and the CPTPP. But I don't know, this can be under the, G2 situation. But at least, for the substances, CPTPP can contribute to the establishment of new global new system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mita. Professor Stoeckel?
Well, yes, I've summarized before in my comments, but the world trade environment is getting tougher, right? There's no question there's an interventionist kind of streak running through. Multilateralism is in decline. And so regional arrangements, stand a very good kind of backstop towards, those developments. The key thing to watch is how the new trade policy arrangements emerge in the United States. Now, while things are tougher, and that sounds a bit pessimistic, the optimistic thing is that trade is win-win. Both parties gain. And so what we need to do is to measure those gains and report them publicly in a way. And done properly, as I explained in those other supporting documents, it changes the politics of protection, right? So if you're going to tax trade, you'll have less trade. It's as simple as that. And all these interventions, whether it's the standards, a license, a local content scheme, some other requirement, one non-tariff barrier, that all matter. It's an impediment to commerce, right? And commerce leads to prosperity and makes people better off.
Thank you, Professor. That's a very nice sum up of your thoughts.
Okay.
Well, we come to the end of the webinar. We definitely have a very insightful discussion on this topic. And I'm sure all of us will go away having new perspective of the CPTPP and how we can better leverage it for our companies or our members to expand and grow with this very curated and targeted FTA for the Asia-Pacific region. The CPTPP represent how we can better leverage a new era of economic cooperation and opportunity for our region. And we are very happy that we can be here today to find out more about the benefits and features of the CPTPP. I must therefore thank you, the organizing committee of the Confederation of Chamber of Commerce and Industry, CACCI, and the Japan Chamber of Commerce and Industry for their time and effort in bringing this webinar to fruition. By bringing together different Chamber of Commerce and Industry from members' country, the CACCI serves as a powerful platform for collaboration, network, and sharing of the best practices through our perspective for our collective efforts. We can foster an environment that encourages business to explore the vast opportunity from CPTPP and members of CACCI. Let us embrace this agreement with enthusiasm and determination, working hand in hand to unleash its full potential. Together, I believe we can build a prosperous, sustainable future for growth and development. And with that, I thank you, and I thank you to all the distinguished speakers for being here with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.